Hi, everyone. Welcome to the live stream. Today is Monday, April 27th. Let me go ahead and pull up my live lesson from Nearpod. And this one's going to be a little bit different. I've actually set this one up so that it will be done. I'm going to be turning it into the people at Nearpod to get my Nearpod educator certification. That being said, you got the link right there. It's in the side comments. Click on that link and you can follow along. A couple things you need to know. One is that we are getting to the point now where we are in our crunch time, getting prepared for the AP exam. It's going to be 2 weeks from tomorrow, Tuesday, May 12th at 3 p.m. So what you'll need to do, make sure that you are signing on to Google Classroom. Make sure you're going to that assignment I posted. Make sure that you are able to get into the myap.collegeboard.org website. If you can't get into it, let me know. I've got their customer support number. You can give them a call. They'll give you a temporary password to get in. But you got to get that one done. Also, when you sign into My AP, make sure that you are going into the system settings, your account information, and change. If you use the ebrschools.org email address, change it. Make sure you change it to an email address that you use on a regular basis. The reason you need to do that is because on Tuesday, May 12th at 3 p.m., actually about 15 minutes before that, 3 p.m. is when it starts, they will actually send you a link through that website, through that email address. You'll click on that email address and that sends you to the test. So those 2 points are covered. Make sure you're able to get into myap.collegeboard.org and make sure you're also able to switch your primary email address. If you use the EBR Schools email address, change it to something that you have access to. Mr. Sampson was trying to get in touch with the school board to give you guys access to EBR Schools email. Unfortunately, I have not heard any up or down about that. So we're going to go ahead and kind of err on the side of caution here, that you're able to get the link. So go ahead and get that changed out to an email address that you use on a regular basis. Secondly, if you are, we are running a compilation of people who are deciding that they do not want to take the test. If you decide this, let me know. You can do it through Google Classroom. Send me a note through there, or send Mr. Sampson an email. Let him know that you're not wanting to take the test. We're working to get that information compiled together because at the end, we need to know who's not taking it so we can scrub you from the rosters. However, once again, let me stress that right now, it would be in your best interest to go ahead and try to take it. Here's why. One, the test usually costs about $100 a person. And if someone wanted to take let's say 10 years ago, someone like me, I was in more than 10 years. But if I wanted to take this AP test when I was in high school, I would have had to pay the $100 to take it. However, because of a grant from East Baton Rouge Parish, you guys actually have the AP test for free. So you're not having to pay. The only thing it's going to cost you is 45 minutes of your time. The second reason is because the regular AP test under normal circumstances would actually take you roughly about 3 hours. However, because of our situation with coronavirus and all these lockdowns and social distancing and all that nonsense, your test is actually going to be 45 minutes. And in that 45-minute test, you're only going to have 2 constructed response questions. This is why I've always been kind of pushing these written written assignments on you, such as these DBQs that a lot of people still have not done. Yeah, that's the reason I do this, because you need to learn how to write a really good constructor response, because uh, under normal circumstances, constructor response is half of the test credit. However, now it's going to be 2 questions, both constructor responses, and you have to provide all this stuff that we've practiced or supposed to have practiced all this time. So all that's going on there. And 3, the other reason, the more selfish reason, is if you do well, you get a 3 or above, you have the opportunity to earn college credit. You'll also have the opportunity through Broadmoor High School. This is being done by Mr. Bradford, that if you get a 3 or above on this AP exam, you'll get $100 award for it. But you have to do well enough to get a 3 or above. So 3, 4, or 5. We're not going to give you $100 if you get a 2. You have to kind of push that in there for quality and give it a little bit of a more of an effort on there. So show the people that you know what you're talking about. All right, guys. So a couple of things. One, round about maybe about, I don't know, about 2:20 or so, you're going to hear an alarm go off. You don't need to worry about that one. That's just for me. I'll have to go ahead and use that as my clock out alarm or clock back in alarm, because technically I'm on lunch break right now. But I have to clock back in and all that good stuff. So just let me know what's going on. Letting you know what's going on. When you hear that alarm, don't be alarmed by it. Alarm by an alarm. That's just for me. All right. So today, your bell ringer was a little bit different. I want you to think about everything we've discussed concerning how cities evolve over time. What are some ways that industrialization, creating all these factories and businesses, could actually harm a city? So go ahead and send your results in. I'll be pulling up. So let's go ahead. Forms on Google.com. Let's see some of your answers here. All right, looks like I have 2 people. Benathon. I'm guessing that must be Mr. Hall. And Kelsey Lee is on as well. Welcome, welcome. All right, so let's see what we've got here. Bell ringers development. And let's go to my responses. And I have one response. That person says, creating too many factories and not enough good housing. That's interesting. Because typically people want to have really good housing in these areas. If you're working in a factory, you need something. You can't just live out in a tent or in your car. So usually with factories, they try to pay their people enough that they actually have pretty decent housing. So I think it's a good thing to think of, especially because in low income areas, people who make low income, low wage earners at certain factories, they actually have to rely on government project housing and such. So that does happen, especially if those factories start going out of business, as we've seen in places like around Chicago, the south side of Chicago, as well as Detroit, Flint, Michigan, those areas there. All right, but here's what we're going to look at. Let's go forward one. My nephew's downstairs. He's playing with Chase on the case. So before we begin, how much do you know about pollution when it comes to city development? Do you know nothing at all? Do you know very little? Do you know some things? Do you know a lot of things? Or could you teach someone in the class? It's kind of a weird way it's set up here. Usually like green and blue would be the good ones, but green and blue start going to the worst ones on this one. I don't know why I did that. All right, so go ahead and submit your answers, and we're going to move forward. Hey, Benathon. Hey, Kelsey. Go ahead and get back in, because it's about to boot you in a second if you don't get back in. All right, here we go. Next up. Totally useless but interesting. Certain particles can remain suspended in the air and travel very long distances. If you have a diesel truck in Los Angeles, one puff of exhaust from it can actually, once it gets into the air, it can travel as far away as the Grand Canyon. So that's out roughly about, I want to say, maybe about 500 to 600 miles away. It's a pretty good distance. Because that's 2,000 from Los Angeles to Chicago. This is maybe about 500 miles. And one puff of diesel exhaust. Think of how much exhaust every time those pistons turn in a diesel engine. It keeps putting it out there. So we have a bit of an issue here. And today's main purpose and main point, we're going to be looking at pollution, as well as the negative sides of what happens when you live in a city with an industrial complex, an industrial area. So first off, you should know that air pollution is a concentration of trace substances at a greater level than occurs in average air. At the local level, air pollution is worse in urban areas thanks to bigger industries and motor vehicles. And what you should be seeing on your screen is a time-lapse image of Beijing, China. And this is during a regular workday. This is actually over the course of a few hours. And you're seeing this large, giant ball of smog, like this cloud of pollution, just kind of roll into the city. And you should be looking at the bottom and seeing those cars going speeding real fast like ants on there. That's how fast this thing slowed up. Those cars are actually traveling maybe around 55, 60 miles an hour. But this is just showing you how this fog actually moves in and all this pollution. One of the things when it comes to coronavirus is it hit China especially hard because they have so much pollution in these areas that the people living there already have compromised respiratory systems. They already have lung infections and lung cancers and such. So when this infection, this virus gets out and starts infecting people's lungs and their ability to breathe and such, then that's why they're going to see a much higher death rate. Now, one of the things I love, I say love kind of sarcastically here, is when people talk about CO2, carbon dioxide as a pollutant. And one of the biggest things I've heard was that CO2 is not a pollutant. However, air pollution is not necessarily like, say, toxic chemicals in the air. Carbon dioxide is completely natural. It's not, while it is caused and generated by burning fossil fuels, it's not exactly something that's gross like soot or any other type of pollution thing when you think of any other thing you think of when you think of pollution. It's clear, you can't breathe it in naturally. I mean, it's part of the air we breathe. Carbon dioxide, nitrogen, oxygen, it's all together in the air. However, too much of it will kill us. And what we consider pollution, though, is going to be the concentration of carbon, of these trace carbon dioxide atoms in the atmosphere. Think about the world, the planet, as a big fish tank. Well, something like orange juice. Orange juice is natural, right? So you have your fish tank, you got your fish swimming around there pretty happy, and you take maybe a capful of orange juice and pour it in the fish tank. What's going to happen? Some of the fish might flock towards it to get those little bits of orange that are floating in there. but it's not going to really affect them all that much. However, if you get a gallon jug of orange juice and pour it into a fish tank, you're going to start seeing your fish start dying. It's just too much of a concentration of that orange juice in the aquarium. And same thing happens with air pollution. Too much of a concentration of these substances in the atmosphere compared to the irregular average. So here we're having an example. You're seeing two pictures, one from 1996, the other one from 2016. Air pollution in Los Angeles was crazy. It was one of the worst cities in the United States for pollution. However, over the past 20 years, they've actually done some work to cut down on pollution. And as such, the air's cleared up a lot around it. You've probably seen some memes around with coronavirus showing how, hey, because of coronavirus, no one's going out. We're seeing clear air. I saw one person actually use the Universal logo. If you ever see the Universal pictures thing, this Universal logo flying through the air because no pollution. You can see it now. It's a joke, of course, but you know how it is. All right, so let's move forward. Brownfields. On a local scale, a brownfield is going to be a former industrial region. However, it either has the presence or potential presence of hazardous waste or pollution. We might see this in old abandoned factories. We might see power plants. All these things are considered brownfields because there's a risk of pollution thanks to a lack of maintenance. A lot of these brownfields they might be sold off, they might be just abandoned completely. But as they stand there and they're exposed to the elements with no human maintenance being performed on it, then they start to degrade and fall to pieces. Like in this case, I'm not sure exactly where this picture is. I saw it and fell in love with it. But each of those tanks you're seeing on those supports, you can see they're kind of these rusty brown colors. Well, what's going to end up happening is eventually those things are going to rust through. And when they rust through, those tanks are going to be falling over and just collapsing on themselves. So on a regional scale, let's look past just local areas. We've seen cities and all this, air pollution in the cities, but let's look bigger. We've already mentioned with the that totally useless but interesting area, we've already said that, hey, one puff of diesel exhaust in Los Angeles can actually make it to the Grand Canyon. That's looking regionally. If the air pollution is bad enough, it can actually damage an entire region's vegetation and water supply. Chemicals like sulfur, nitrogen oxide gets into the atmosphere. It combines with oxygen and water, and naturally it starts getting into clouds. And when we have rainstorms, we start seeing acid rain. You've probably seen at some point statues or buildings. Oh, there's my timer. Let me go ahead and 1 second, guys. Let me get to this one. Clock in. All right. So chemicals like sulfur, nitrogen, you've probably seen these statues where the nose would be kind of eroded away on these statues. Or maybe there are buildings where the sides, a brick is starting to be washed away. In those cases, that is because of acid rain. There was actually a major thing with some classical Greek sculptures that had been around since like 300 BC, these classical Greek stuff and Greek and Roman sculptures. And unfortunately, just from the rise of pollution over the past 200 years, a lot of them have been damaged and sometimes irreplaceably damaged because of acid rain splashing on them and eroding it away over time. So let's go forward from there. We've already seen the local scale, cities, the regional scale, which is larger areas, but then we can look at the global scale. And this is where we get to carbon dioxide. Both industry and human activity is going to produce carbon dioxide. And while carbon dioxide is a natural part of our atmosphere, too much of it can actually be harmful. Just like pouring a little bit of orange juice in a fish tank, a little bit to begin with, it's not going to harm their fish. They might even like it and go after those little orange bits. But if you pour an entire gallon of orange juice, it's going to do a lot of damage to your fish tank. So CO2 traps radiation from the earth, and it causes the temperature to rise. So this radiation from the sun comes down to the earth. It reflects off the earth, and it gets caught in the atmosphere. Now, under normal circumstances, you would actually see it kind of go into the earth, and then a lot of it would go back out. However, what's happening is extra carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is causing that radiation to stay in the atmosphere. And that's what's causing the world to warm up. It doesn't seem like a very big change, only maybe 1 or 2 degrees centigrade. But, there's just 1 or 2 degrees can cause a lot of trouble. Case in point, you all should know that the freezing temperature of water is 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, just one temperature up, 33 degrees, and even though it's going to stay cold for a while, it's going to start melting because it's not that 32 degrees to stay ice. So we start seeing global warming happening. And with global warming, we start seeing climate change, or as I would call it, climate shift, because we're actually seeing these different weather patterns kind of shifting over to other areas. It's kind of weird, but change, shift, for me, it's all the same thing. And welcome back, Ben. So I'll put this on all devices. Your current events, coronavirus. As crazy as it's been for us, it's actually caused a reduction in air pollution. So here's a brief video. I'm going to put my thing on hold on mute so no one else will have to hear it. I'll play this one. You can play it yourselves. And here we go. It's 2 minutes and 30 seconds.
Using container ships passing through every day. But as the coronavirus outbreak has worsened, the economy has slowed and the waters have become quiet. The situation is a lot worse in mainland China, where, according to one estimate, lockdowns and business closures may have already cost almost $200 billion this year. But as the economic price of this outbreak goes up, the damage to the environment is going down. Studies show that a drop in coal and oil use in China have reduced carbon dioxide emissions by at least 25%. And levels of general air pollutants are also significantly down.
Across key industrial indicators such as coal-fired power stations and steel production, there have been big reductions, 15 to 40% in each of those indicators. And in aggregate, we think something like 100 million tonnes of CO2 hasn't been emitted compared to last year.
There are less emissions elsewhere too. Much of the global supply chain has been broken by the disruptions in China. Factories in countries like Cambodia and Vietnam can't get enough raw materials from China, so are slowing down or suspending operations. And the International Air Transport Association expects global demand for air travel to fall by almost 5% this year. In Asia, that number could be higher. Less demand means fewer planes in the air and a decrease in emissions. We've seen this sort of thing before, like during the 2008 global financial crisis. But after that economic slowdown, China looked to make up for lost time. by introducing a massive stimulus plan designed to get the economy moving again, meaning any environmental gains were soon lost. China's government has already promised tax cuts and other assistance to help companies bounce back from the economic impact of the outbreak. President Xi Jinping wants a quick recovery, but that could be risky.
I think the leaders in Beijing are very eager to restart the economy. We have already seen some of the factories sequentially opened. But the concern is that if the workers started to come back to the companies and offices, there could be a potential second wave of the spread of the virus.
Workers will also be wanting to start earning again after many companies suspended wages because of the downturn. As China's economic engine starts turning over again, scientists will be watching with interest what happens to the environment as a result. Wayne Hay, Al Jazeera, Hong Kong.
All right, so that was what's going on right now with coronavirus. Because all these economies have stopped producing, people have stopped moving, we've actually seen a lot of these areas where there's heavy pollution like Beijing and Shanghai, we've actually seen air pollution start dissipating and start going away. Now, the challenge is, how long is that going to last? If the Chinese decide to go crazy full force and reopen whenever this thing is passed, we're going to start seeing that entire air pollution level start spiking up. Same thing here in the United States. We're not immune to it. If we open too fast, not corona. We are going to see the same thing happening. Opening too fast without a formal plan in place, we're going to start seeing a lot of air pollution start going back out into the air again. So it's a little bit of a tricky challenge here. How do we get back to normal without being as dirty as we used to be? So on local scales, we also have the issue of solid waste. In other words, everything that you throw away, if it goes into a garbage can, if it gets put out on the street for the truck to take, that is all part of solid waste. We have sanitary landfills. If you live in Livingston Parish, you probably smell ours. Woodside landfill out in Walker. Fun facts, before, in the olden golden days before I became a teacher, I actually worked at the Coles over on Jubin Crossing. And one night we were closing up and the manager looks at me and asked me what that smell was. And I said, it's not me. But in actuality, what it was the wind had caught just right, and the scent from the Woodside landfill, which was about 2 miles away in Walker, was blowing over to us. So our problem is we have some possible contaminants leaching into groundwater. And this has been something that has been challenged on numerous occasions by different landfills. What they end up doing nowadays is before they put new trash in, they will actually put a rubber, almost like a thick, I want to say about 2-inch thick liner down. And what that liner does is it protects the ground from any groundwater from being contaminated. Because let's face it, guys, all these different plastics and such being put into the ground, Louisiana, it rains a lot here. And all that water goes through the landfill and eventually it's going to get into the groundwater. So what they do is as they build these landfills up, they'll put these thick, usually it's kind of a spray, almost like a spray they take out there, and they put down this liner for the bottom. Then they dump the trash in, and then they'll cover it. And then they'll put more trash on top of that one, cover that one. Highest point in Livingston Parish is the Woodside landfill. It stands about, I want to say about 198 feet tall. You can actually go out there on a clear day, and you'll actually watch these trucks, dump trucks, moving up and down the side of the landfill. It's crazy. I had no idea how big it was until I saw it for myself. If your landfill doesn't have space, well, you got a lot of paper products, well, you burn them. Now, burning things, as fun as it may be, you do have some issues there. While you could burn something that's natural like wood, wooden furniture, or cotton cloth or paper products, that's fine. I mean, it's not great, but at the same time, it's also, not exactly putting anything nasty into the environment. However, when you get to stuff like burning plastics, that's where you start having major issues because, as you should know, plastics come from petroleum. And if you burn it, you're going to release a lot more carbon dioxide into the air than you would burning, say, a piece of wood or maybe a cotton shirt. Anything that's made of plastics or polymers is going to release a lot more carbon dioxide. We also have the issue of hazardous waste, heavy metals, mechanical oils, poisons, acids, chemicals, and in some cases, nuclear radioactive waste. So I always love that they always put nuclear waste in a barrel like that when it's an oil barrel they use on their cartoons, but that's not exactly what it looks like. Essentially, radioactive waste is almost like a large shipping container, but on the inside it's got lead walls, and they put their radioactive spent fuel into those areas covered with lead. So hazardous waste, things like household waste, like paints, solvents, cleaners, bottle of Windex you throw out one day, that's considered hazardous. Automotive waste, antifreeze, oil, industry waste, which is waste from petroleum products. Pesticides. Yeah, you hate those bugs in your yard, especially the ones that are eating your trees. We've had to deal with some of those around on the farm here, some big green, nasty-looking caterpillars wanting to chew up all of our trees. We've never seen these types before. Radioactive waste and biomedical waste, such as used needles and such. That's biomedical. So all these things, you have to try to find a new way to deal with them. So real quick, your question here, what could be some possible consequences for the improper disposal of hazardous materials? Not just consequences for the earth, but what are some consequences, like some punishments that should be meted out for dumping these things illegally? Improperly disposing of these items. Because I got to tell you, if you come up with a good idea, the city of San Francisco might want to hear it. To combat their heroin epidemic, they started giving out free needles. Essentially, they were trying to keep people from sharing needles or using dirty needles and getting infected with other different things like HIV. But what's happened was, giving out these free needles, these people are using the needles, getting high, and then throwing the dirty needle on the ground. So there's, unfortunately, that's not really wanting to help. And how do you deal with that? I mean, if someone is living on the streets, they're homeless, what could you do? Can't really fine them. Could you put them in jail? Should you put them in jail? According to San Francisco, no. So they're having some issues. Water pollution. Industry needs water, but we humans, all animals need water too. And water pollution comes from both manufacturing as well as sewage. Everything you flush or anything that goes down your sink. If you have a incinerator, which is a garbage disposal, you have a little extra meat left over from dinner, toss it in there, grind it up, and send it down the tubes. All that can be considered pollution. Anything you flush or goes down the sink drain. And sometimes when pollution gets too terrible, too bad, we actually see instances like the time in Ohio when the Cuyahoga River, it's kind of hard for me to say. Back in the 1960s and 70s, it was so polluted, it caught fire. numerous times. And those fires led to the creation of what we now know as the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, signed into law by Richard Nixon. So here's a brief video on the Cuyahoga River fire.
We all know about the river fire of '69, and as somebody who's interested in the history of Cleveland and Cuyahoga River, I know that wasn't the best fire. You know, I know there was other fires that could have burned down Cleveland had not the wind shifted from the north. I remember a '52 fire. In fact, that was, I think that one probably would have won the prize for the best fire. I was actually working the day that the river caught on fire, actually working as a hatch tender on the ships. So it's kind of unusual when somebody would yell fire and tell you to run away from the river. The river is generally water, but when you were working down on the river at that time, the river was like a cauldron. It would just bubble up, oxygen trying to get out of the river. It had a coat of oil on it, and you'd see rats float down the river the size of dogs, bloated from whatever it was that they ingested. And there was a rule that if you fell in the river, you immediately went to the emergency room in the hospital. So the idea here was don't fall in the river.
All right, so here we go. Water pollution. Another type of pollution that we don't think about is called non-point source pollution. This is pollution that's caused indirectly. It's not from factories and not from major sewage. However, it does come into play when it comes to things like agriculture. As all these groups, these farmers in, say, Nebraska or Missouri, they're using all these different fertilizers. Well, the plants take the fertilizer, what they can, and what's left over stays in the ground. And then it rains. And naturally, all this rainwater tries to find its natural source, the place where it's going to drain to. And eventually it winds up in something like the Missouri River or the Mississippi River or the Red River. And it all flows down. This is the kind of pollution that's really hard to stop. I mean, anyone can put new pollution effects and controls on factories and say, hey, cut your pollution by this much and find some new technology. However, non-point source is much harder to stop. You can't really tell these farmers not to use these different fertilizers because they kind of need them. And what happens is all this stuff gets washed into the rivers and then into the ocean. And here in Louisiana, we actually have something off the coast called the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. Here's a video on that one, about 3 minutes.
A man-made phenomenon is threatening marine life in the Gulf of Mexico. The largest dead zone ever recorded in the U.S. has appeared at the mouth of the Mississippi River. Scientists say it's primarily caused by fertilizer and sewage that wash off farmland. The runoff eventually makes its way to the sea, where it feeds algae blooms and bacteria that sucks out all the oxygen of the water. CBS News correspondent Jeff Glore is in Louisiana with how the dead zone is impacting one of the largest seafood industries in the country.
Underwater video we recorded yesterday afternoon shows the transition from life to death as green fades to black. It becomes so dark, divers need flashlights to find their way around. Down here, there is almost no oxygen in the water, and this void stretches over an enormous portion of the Gulf.
This is the largest one we've ever measured and the second largest human-caused dead zone in the ocean.
Nancy Rabelais is the nation's foremost expert on dead zones. She's been measuring oxygen levels in the Gulf since 1985.
It's a feature that's large, it's not getting smaller, and attempts to manage the nutrients, nitrogen, particularly from the Mississippi River, are not having an effect on reducing the size.
Dead zones happen when agricultural runoff sends nitrogen-rich fertilizer downstream into the sea. The fertilizer feeds harmful amounts of algae at the surface that eventually die and sink to the bottom. Bacteria feast on the dead algae, removing oxygen from the water, and fish, crabs, and shrimp are forced to leave or suffocate and die.
The solution lies upstream in the watershed with better agricultural management practices, a switch to crops that have deeper roots and don't need as much fertilizer and are still just as profitable as corn.
The water we watched them measure yesterday has less than half the oxygen needed to support basic fish life. It's almost like a different planet.
It's if you're a scuba diver, you're used to having fish swimming all around you. From 30 to 60 feet, we won't see any fish. Nothing.
These species of shrimp are not there like they used to be.
O'Neill John Sabin has been fishing these waters more than 40 years. From a fishing perspective, you're talking about smaller shrimp or no shrimp at all.
Correct.
A study led by Duke University published this year found that dead zones in the Gulf do slow shrimp growth, resulting in higher prices for larger shrimp.
Do you see this issue getting better anytime soon?
Boy, I wish it would. I really do wish it would.
The EPA has set up a task force to look at dead zones. They are hoping to reduce nutrient-rich runoff by 20% by 2025. In Dulac, Louisiana, Jeff Glore, CBS News.
All right, moving forward. So here's a collaborate board. The previous slide's video addressed the Gulf of Mexico dead zone caused by farm runoff pollution. So who should address this problem and how can it be fixed? We'll see how it goes. How can it be fixed? All right. Newly industrialized countries. You're seeing on your map here, all these countries in red. These are countries whose level of economic development is somewhere between the less developed countries and the more developed countries. They are in transition. Mexico, Brazil, South Africa, Turkey, India, Indonesia, China, all these places are newly industrialized. All right. So changes in international industry. We have two big things to look out for. One are the Asian tigers. There's 4 of these. Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong, and South Korea. These 4 areas are going to be focusing on creating consumer goods to export to other places. In fact, a lot of consumer goods, flip over the tag in your shirt, you might see it say made in Singapore or made in Hong Kong, made in Taiwan. Those are the 3 big ones. South Korea to a lesser degree, but they still do a lot. So a lot of the stuff I've seen for sale is usually from Taiwan or Singapore. Then we have the BRIC countries, the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, and China. They're similar. However, they're also doing a lot more, not just with consumer goods. They're also looking at doing stuff like energy creation. All right, moving forward. So quick question. What are some non-industrial factors that lead to the development of a newly industrial country? You can go ahead and post your answers on here. I'll leave this open in the student pace version so you can actually compare your answers to each other. And let's go forward. So changes in domestic industry. In the United States, we're seeing industries moving to the Southeast, especially foreign automobile companies. On your picture here, I've got a map showing all these different auto companies that have actually moved from places like Detroit and Chicago to the southeast. You're seeing Atlanta. There's a Kia plant in Atlanta, Toyota plant, or Nissan plant and Toyota plant in Mississippi. Honda, Hyundai, Mercedes in Alabama. There's one called Elio in Louisiana. I do not know what Elio is, so maybe if one of you guys knows it, I've never heard of Elio. The one I think is really fun is if you look at Georgia, there's that blue symbol. If you look closely, that's Bluebird. And you should know Bluebird. A lot of you guys were riding Bluebird 5 days a week. That is a manufacturer of school buses, Bluebird. Freightliner, they make semi 18-wheelers in North Carolina. All right, moving forward. Oh, in Europe, manufacturing has been moving to Eastern and Southern Europe, places like Greece, Italy, Croatia. Asking lots of big booms from industry. So we now have a new international division of labor. We have outsourcing happening. How many times have you called a AT&T or another tech company, Apple, and maybe you had someone on the phone who was from, say, India or Bangladesh? In those cases, this is outsourcing. They're transferring these jobs from these core developed countries to developing countries, especially if they are in demand for low-paid and less skilled workers. Corporations are looking for these independent suppliers of labor in other places. Let's face it, in the United States, if you have to hire someone for, I think, $7.25 is the minimum wage in the United States. Well, why pay $7.25 here in the United States when you can hire someone, set up a call center in India, and pay them $4 an hour? In the end, they're doing the same thing. However, you're paying them a lot less. One of our issues with this one, it makes it necessary, not just for business reasons, but also we have a 24/7 global network, 24 hours a day. How many times have you seen on your phone bill or any other thing, call us 24 hours a day, our hotline for customer support? Well, there are people working those hotlines on the other side of the world. So it's one of our kind of an issue here is the fact that all these different companies are trying to cater to in-demand people's demands. I call it the McDonald's effect. You can go to McDonald's 24 hours a day. If you wanted a hamburger at 2 a.m., you can go to a McDonald's and get a hamburger at 2 a.m. I don't know why you would, but you could. So that's what's happening. It's kind of a fast food. If we want it, we want it now. No one seems to get the entire, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. We're based in California, so you have to call during those times in California. So 9 a.m. in California would be about 11 a.m. here in Louisiana. So that's kind of our issue there. Now, if the United States were to go to just, people not be so wanting for all these different things and demanding it right then and there, then maybe we could get rid of this outsourcing to a degree. So this leads to what we call the commodity chain. We gather these resources, manufacturing and distribution, all together into a chain to produce more products, to make more sales. So guess what? If you're growing cotton in Louisiana, you ship it to someone buys it from you. They'll ship that cotton to Mexico, and they'll take that cotton, they'll turn it into textiles, into cloth. Some of that cloth they'll send to you in the United States. They'll sell it as patterned cloth for arts and crafts. Others, they might have someone buying it from them in Singapore. So they ship this cotton to Singapore. People in Singapore make it into cloth, and they'll make shirts and pants and all that good stuff, and they'll ship it to the United States to sell it. So that is your chain from your raw materials and bouncing off all these resources, manufacturing and distribution, until you get this chain where you can supply all these needs to everyone. It's kind of like a food chain. In Mexico, we've got the maquiladoras, factories built by United States companies in Mexico just across the border. Places like Ford, the image you're seeing here is one of these factories in Mexico. All right. So once we've got that done, those places in Mexico are considered to be an export processing zone. It's an industrial region with easy access to transportation, very few environmental regulations, and enough tax exemption for these foreign companies to invest in. So those areas, Mexico has their own export processing zones, and that's where they're going to use to try to get these American companies to come build in Mexico. All right. So, political cartoon interpretation. On this, I want you to use the Draw It feature and draw on this political cartoon. Point out any evidence in the cartoon that helps you explain what the meaning behind the cartoon is. You can mark on this cartoon as much as you like. Once you've done that, you'll be submitting this cartoon in answering a question about it. So study the cartoon, use your marker tools to mark it up a little bit, color it in, circle things, draw arrows, however you want to do it. Go ahead and get that done. Once you've done that, though, I want you to tell me what the meaning, what's the message based on what you've drawn on there. So after doing the Draw It segment, what can you infer about this cartoon? What is the cartoon's message? All right. Every settlement has three things: basic industries, which are going to be your essential economic drivers. And if this industry would leave your city, the city is going to die. So things like mining, oil, agriculture, those are your basic industries. There are certain cities, especially in places in Pennsylvania and West Virginia, where you'll see there were coal cities. And as the coal mines dried up or people started using less coal, the industry collapsed in those areas and people were out of work. So their city may have had 2,000 people living in it 100 years ago. Nowadays, maybe has less than 100. Just the last remnants of the small city here. Non-basic industries are going to be non-essential consumer services that are inside the city. Things like banks, retail, restaurants, etc. All this stuff that kind of is supported by and also supports the population who works at these basic industries. All right. And three, once you combine those two together, you have the economic base. The combination of basic and non-basic industries to create your economic foundation for your city. So I have two people watching. Very good. But here's what we have as a problem. Remember I told you about those coal cities that main industry shuts down and the city shuts down around it? That's called deindustrialization. When an industry leaves an area, it takes that economic base with them. A major factory could close, causing all the businesses around it to close. And your picture here is the old Packard automotive plant in Detroit. Packard Automotive went out of business back in the 1950s. However, for the longest time, the buildings or offices and such that you're seeing here stayed open. They rented it out for different companies in different areas. Eventually, those companies went other places. And the building just fell over the past 20 years or so. The building has fallen into complete disarray. It's falling apart. You can see there's rubble there. There's graffiti. It's just completely gone. So this is our biggest problem, deindustrialization here. All right, so here's your next quiz. 5 questions, 4 answers apiece. Kind of a review. One of them I've gotten from the difficult guys, the difficult question from Albert. Go ahead and answer those. Do as best you can. So your exit ticket, you're going to do an exit ticket first, and that's going to be asking how you understand, can explain pollution and development and how they influence each other. And also describe the economic structure of a newly industrializing country and to be as specific as possible. That's your exit ticket. And your last thing, here's a little note here. Oh, I don't need this. And our last thing is I want you to grade yourself again, scale of 1 to 5. Now that you finish, how much do you know about pollution when it comes to city development? Do you know nothing, very little? Do you know some things? Do you know a lot? Or could you teach someone? All right, ladies and gents, so that's going to be the end of today's show, today's stream. I'll be posting this one up on Google Classroom within the next few minutes. I'm still have not been able to finish the Spanish translation, so I'll have that one up there as well. Make sure that you're actually able to do all the stuff. Once again, reminder from the beginning of the stream, go out there and, what's this? I found out what those do. Go make sure you can sign into My AP. If you're choosing not to do the AP test, let me know. Let Mr. Sampson know. All that good stuff. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your Monday. I have to go fry fish for my father. Birthday. See y'all later.